So yeah, I'm Euan Adie from allmetric.com. I've met some of you before, but not everyone. I wasn't going to speak about allmetric.com specifically today. I was going to speak about gaming altmetrics. So, all of you here in the room are, I'm sure, very familiar with gaming metrics and the various kind of questions and things that happen around that. But I thought it might be interesting to talk about how it applies to new forms of metrics. So as a quick reminder, or maybe a primer if you haven't sort of been particularly engaged with altmetrics in the past, just to zoom out a bit, altmetrics in general, the idea of it is to help people get credit where credit is due, right? So it's not a byproduct of it. The whole point of altmetrics is really to help people get some data to get something from, right? So they're supposed to use it to gain something. And the way it does that is if you think about traditional metrics, they are often looking at scholarly influence, specifically citations. And quite often if you're looking at the sort of main commercial scholarly indexes, they're working on journal articles and then increasingly books, but mostly journal articles. The idea behind altmetrics is you expand that, right? We start looking at more objects as kind of primary research outputs, so data sets and software, also books. And then as well as scholarly influence, that is a very important part of what you do as a scholar. So not saying that this altmetrics is a replacement or is better than or anything like that, but that we expand it a little bit, we broaden the horizons of how you can get credit for work. And for example, can we split up into things like looking at the quality of the work, looking at the attention of the work, looking at the impact of the work. Right, so ideally you have a combination, maybe you have all three of those, but first of all, your work should be reproducible, should be good, solid work. It could be a technical advance. It doesn't need to be, like a leap of new thinking. But that is separate to attention, which is purely kind of how well the article was disseminated and what audiences it reached. And bear in mind that you might write an article with a particular audience in mind, okay? So your goal for a paper might be just to, not necessarily to stand on the shoulders of giants and create some new science, but to write a review for a particular audience. And then finally, by impact, what I mean is, or here in the UK, we talk about starting the pathway to impact, which is things like being cited in grey literature. So if you think about the NHS here in the UK, NICE produces clinical guidelines. How should we treat, type 2 diabetes here? That is a piece of work created by experts drawing on the published literature, right? You get cited there. Those citations don't appear in Scopus or Google Scholar or Web of Science, but they are an important, you should get credit for that, right? That is an important impact you've had. It's not scholarly influence, but it is something you should get credit for. So I'll very quickly go through these. I don't have many slides about this stuff because we'll get straight to the gaming pretty soon, but as an example of how these things are different, so attention, you could think about, okay, how many people have seen it and saved it to the Mendeley reference manager, right, to cite later, potentially. How many people have posted about it to a social media site like Facebook or Twitter, this kind of thing. And then that's obviously different to quality. Just because you've been posted a lot to Facebook does not mean that it's a better paper. The more tweets you get doesn't automatically make it better research. But there are also sources online that altmetrics can look at that do talk about quality. So here, obviously, quality is a very subjective thing. There's a whole other talk that I'm not going to give here. But if you think about something like Faculty of 1,000, right? They are systematically they're reviewing literature and then, giving some stamp of approval and, well, indeed a rating to different types of outputs. If you think about something like Publons or PubPeer, so Publons is, making reviews public, and PubPeer is, collecting anonymous comments. I spoke a little bit about them yesterday, about the good things and the bad things. And then impact, like I said, is things like how you're being picked up and actually used, right? Where are the places where it starts interfacing with how this research is used in policy and legislation. And that's, across a lot of different fields, maybe less so in the humanities, but certainly, in the social sciences and economics, especially in clinical sciences, environmental science, all these kind of things. So that's the background, just to give some context. Hopefully you knew some of that already. And why do people care about this? For two reasons, really. And again, remember the difference between quality, attention, and impact. But the first is just because funders are interested in it. And when the money's interested in it, that means the people who get the money are interested in it. And it comes from increased pressure on scientists. There's less funding for your studies. One of the things, less money going into the funders, especially again here in the UK, this is true. And so to kind of prove that taxpayers are getting their money's worth, funders increasingly ask for some kind of impact, right? What did we get out of the work? We know it's good work already. We've always asked for quality, but also can you show us that it's improving life expectancy or saving money in this field or letting us spin off new companies, all this kind of thing. And then the second reason, which got covered a lot in the conference yesterday, is around reputation. So if you think about attention, which I mentioned before, just like how well is it disseminated and things, why as a researcher, should you care about that? It is to some degree the journal's job to disseminate it. Maybe I can just forget it and leave it. The reason you might want to care about it is so that because you want people to notice you want to build your personal brand. The reason you want to do that is so that you can find more collaborators, this kind of thing. Again, I won't go into a lot of detail about this, but it's a new form of network, right? Scientists have always done it. They may not have done it online before. It may have just been a question of going to conferences, presenting posters, talking to people in coffee breaks, this kind of thing. It's an extension of that. A lot of the online work that we see, certainly in all metrics. So, to get to gaming. So, the interesting question for us as an all-metrics company, and people have been doing research in new metrics for decades. All-metrics is a term, and especially in the context of kind of new social media metrics, looking at newspapers and magazines and policy documents, this kind of thing, it's really only the last sort of 4 or 5 years. There's not a great body of work, of research work behind it when it comes to gaming. So the first question for us literally was, what is gaming? Not what is gaming in the the broader sense, we know that, but what is gaming when it comes to all metrics? So it's actually quite interesting for me to find out what you think. So as a kind of audience participation thing, I thought we would do this. So I've got 4 slides now of some different examples. What I'd like you to do is raise your hand, and keep it raised, if you think that the scenario on the slide should constitute gaming all metrics. So all metrics in this case is some measure of the attention, quality, impact of your work. So here's the most basic one. So Alice publishes a paper. She tweets about it herself, so she promotes it herself, and then 20 of her friends retweet it. Is that gaming?
No.
So, yeah, you're jumping ahead in my slides there. But yes, I agree. So what about this one? So she has a new paper out, she tweets about it. So she explicitly tweeted about it, and she has a piece of software that automatically takes anything she tweets and then pushes it to yet more social platforms. So now the agency has been removed there, right? It's appearing in places that she didn't explicitly put it. A second one, same kind of deal. She has a new paper out. She writes about it on her lab blog, so she's promoting it herself again. But she also sends an email highlighting it to a colleague who she knows, might talk about it to other people. Is that all good? Yeah. All right, 3 or 4. So beginning to get, I think, a little bit more dodgy, but she has a new paper out. She asks her colleagues to share it, so she explicitly asks her colleagues to share it if they think it'd be useful to other people. That one okay? Fairly uncontroversial? All right, what about this one? She has a new paper out and she asks grad students to blog about it.
That's not fine.
Why not?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because then there's a certain implication of what happens if they say no. How much trouble would they get? The pressure
Yeah.
involved there.
Yeah, that pressure. Yeah, I think you're right.
Is that the same reason you would give? Yeah, I think that's a good point. Then last one, two quite related but different. So Alice has a new paper out. She really loves what she does. She believes it contains important information for diabetes patients. She pays for an advert on Twitter pointing to the research. That's the first scenario. And the second one is she's written this paper, and she wants to spread it as far as possible. You know, that's the same motivation in both cases. But she pays one of these services where you pay, you know, $10 for 10,000 retweets or something. So, good or bad? It's interesting to hear about the grad student one. For us, the conclusion we came to is that the only really unacceptable one for us was this one. The one where she's paid for someone to put out retweets. So she hasn't asked anyone to read the paper or do it for her. She's kind of paid this anonymous service to do it many, many times.
So how did, sorry, can I?
Yep.
Sorry, Euan. How do you draw the distinction between a natural desire and probably even a worthy desire to spread the news and pay for it, perhaps,
Yeah.
and actually an attempt to game the system?
Yeah. So that's the question I'm going to touch on in the next slide. But for example, the difference for me, and I'm interested in your opinions and talking about it, that's partly why we do the slides like this, is on the top one here, she pays for an advert. It's obviously an advert, right? It's not gaming per se. It is not very sophisticated promotion of an article. Whereas in the latter one, she's paying, it looks like it might be real people. You could potentially be fooled into thinking there are people who have found this paper and are tweeting about it, right? And it's raising a score. So in terms of what we took from that, or the framework for how we might interpret it, and this is what I'm interested again in hearing from you about, is this. So we thought the two things we could look at would be intent and value. It's such a thin line, right, between being able to promote your work. Obviously, we want you to do that as a publisher, as a journal. But the way we want you to do it is to add some value to the process, right? To reach a particular audience with it, to make more people read it, to add a description of it. If you think about writing an editorial summary or something, or getting an author to write a blog post about their paper, all this kind of thing does add value. Some things don't add value. So you can increase some numbers by paying a service to retweet something 10,000 times. But first of all, no one is following those tweeters, so no one's going to see it. Second of all, those tweeters aren't even real, so they're not going to see it. Even if there was a tiny chance that they might click on the link as they were posting it, that doesn't exist. It's completely fabricated. The only thing it does is increase the numbers, right? There's no value. But then the second part is intent. Are they doing it to game or for some other reason? Like, lots of people don't care about all metrics at all, but they do care about communicating their paper. That's perfectly valid. We shouldn't be necessarily penalizing those people. Yeah, Kent.
So just looking at that, I'm wondering if I can't interpret how value and intent play in that 2x2.
Yeah.
Saying that there's increasing intent or increasing value, do these things even need to be there?
Yeah. I'll give some specific examples of what I think these categories are. But yeah, so the idea is that good promotion adds value, and you've got some intent to promote the article, I suppose. It's going to become clear in the example, I think. Gaming, yeah, in fact, let's do that. Let's jump straight into what each of those quadrants might represent. So if promoting your work is what we want to happen, the intent there is you want to spread the word about your article. Okay, so that's the same as in gaming and not in gaming, but it's different to some of the other quadrants we're about to see. Is there any value added? Any sort of small modicum of value. It could be, reaching a single person, answering a particular question, this kind of thing, improving how your article is interpreted. And if the answer is yes to any of those, we think it's probably legitimate. And it's quite a low barrier here to be legitimate. And this is where the intention comes in. I think we can differentiate between that and spam. So sometimes articles get a lot of attention, but it's not because there's any kind of intent to actually promote that article. They are actually gamed almost by accident by a third party. And the way that happens on blogs, on social networks, is spammers who are paid to promote, say, an online casino or something, they will have a post on their blog saying, come here and or earn $500 a day or whatever working from home. But then Google and all the different social networks will penalize them heavily, right? They can figure out that content pretty quickly. So the way spammers get around it is they surround it by real-looking content that they've stolen from other user accounts. So that way, when Google's kind of content algorithms look at their blog, it says, oh yeah, it looks pretty legit. It's got some kind of dodgy bits, but on the whole, it's all right. You see this a lot with Twitter, for example, where you can find spammy users, and you'll see it's actually relatively difficult for humans now to see them, but you've got like 10 tweets that are nothing kind of spammy looking or suspicious. They're all over the place. There's no like real theme to them. And then there'll be one for buy gold jewelry or whatever, or casinos, or herbal Viagra, or whatever terrible thing they're advertising. So in terms of to some extent we can quantify that. Twitter periodically does these big deletions of spam tweeters and users. If it figures out that nobody's reading them, no one's really behind them when they're being posted. So of about 48 million tweets we've seen linking to scholarly domains, really, we should say, about 1.2 million have been deleted by Twitter. So there's some other reasons that you might be deleted. So it could be the user deleting the tweets as well. If you think about ICANN has PDF and things like that, there are occasionally reasons, but I think the vast majority of these are spam being automatically deleted. So, if you round it up, that's 2.5%, 3% of all the links to scholarly content from Twitter end up being deleted as spam.
Well, so now I understand a little bit better. So in the spam category, that's basically third party appropriation of your link. You don't have any hand in it.
Yeah, the article is almost incidental.
Okay.
Like there's absolutely no intent.
That's what I didn't know who the agent was in that. So
Yeah,
thanks for
yeah.
clarifying that. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, it's quite confusing.
Okay.
There's better labels for it.
So Euan, are you going to cover what Altmetrics is doing to keep this out of the metric?
Yeah, I'll do that after these. So another one that is, I don't think it really has a parallel in citation gaming, or is it gaming, is incidental. So here, the fact there's an article is, this is a weird Twitter account, so I'll explain it. So somebody has set up a Twitter account for a dam in South Africa, and it's got a water sensor on it, and the water sensor reports automatically to the internet what the level of the water in the reservoir behind the dam is. At the same time as it does that, it links to a paper about the project to measure the water in the dam. So every, whatever it is, every week or 2 weeks or whatever when this thing reports, it tweets out a link to the paper. So this paper ends up having a lot of different tweets. So 34 actually at this point by the time we detect it for the first time. Now that's not really promotion, right? They're not aiming to promote anything. It's not really gaming either. They're not doing it to increase any metrics, but it is specifically about the article. And if you think about some other cases that could be quite similar, we come across blogs that just simply publish abstracts of things that are relevant to the blog author. So they're not adding any value or anything. They're literally almost bookmarking things to go back to later. Or a lot of Twitter accounts that just pick up a particular keyword and then retweet anything about it. So you'll see that for especially popular terms on PubMed sometimes. Accounts that have 100 tweets a day, and it's just, picking up random stuff. So those three, I think, are separate from proper gaming of Altmetrics, where the intent there really is to boost your numbers for a particular article. Right, there's an intent there, and it's not adding value, like I said before. So it's not legitimate marketing, you're not improving the way the article is communicated. So in our experience, a few things. First of all, the place where we see it happen the most is Twitter, and that's for reasons that I'll get into in the next slides, but mainly because the volume is very high and it's very easy to manipulate numbers. It's very hard for us to curate like we do with blogs and news sources and this kind of thing. It is very rare, so it's quite difficult for us to put a precise number on because obviously people may be gaming and getting away with it. We can only report on the numbers that we've figured out definitely are gaming. It's also difficult, and I think I mentioned this in a later slide, because it's all very well saying, okay, we'll just look at the value and the intent, but when it comes down to it, it's actually incredibly difficult to figure out what the intent is. You can't tell why someone is doing something without actually going to them and asking and probing. And at a certain point, it kind of gets past our job to do it. That means it's very difficult to distinguish from spam. There's some cases where it's obvious, so we see things like there'll be a paper with 1,000 tweets. The tweeters themselves are really dodgy. Like we can tell that by looking at Adie. For the reason here at the bottom, it is actually pretty easy to spot gamed or spammed accounts. So if it was a spam problem, normally what you'd expect is it's the same link to the article retweeted 10,000 times. Now that seems like it's probably going to be, a random link picked up and then being used by this spam network to make the network itself look legitimate. It's more likely to be gaming if, and this is like cases we have seen, where there's 4 different links to the article, all with subtly different wording, retweeted by 10,000 different dodgy-looking tweeters. Right there, it seems very unlikely that by chance something would have picked up these 4 separate tweets, all pointing to the same paper. So a couple of tangents, because I've talked a lot about gaming kind of from the perspective of us looking at authors trying to game or other people standing to benefit from it. But when you really get into it, things like these questions are also interesting. So what if a journal puts out a press release that, maybe they kind of know they're doing it. They're not doing it explicitly on purpose, but it's overhyping the results of a study in order to get picked up by more news outlets, right? So okay, if we say, it's done this kind of basic research level stuff, people might be a little bit interested, but it's never going to make the front page of the Washington Post or something. But, what happens if we link it to curing cancer in the next 5 years or something? Is that gaming on the part of the journal? It's not inflating, numbers for the author, but are you behaving unethically if you do this? So we know there was that study in the BMJ recently, looking at exaggeration in press releases and how it correlated with the exaggeration in the news stories that came out, just in case you thought, well, even if we put out an exaggerated press release, the journalists are going to do their fact-checking and speak to the author and things. No, they're not. If the press release is exaggerating the claims, most of the news stories are going to be exaggerating the claims as well. And there, again, so I mentioned how Twitter is difficult for us to curate. So what we don't do is have a whitelist of people and say, look, we know these people are scholars or members of the public or funders or whatever, so we're going to listen to what they say, we're going to take those people into account and ignore everyone else because there's just too many people. But we do it with blogs and news stories. Blogs and news sources. So we don't track what any blog on the internet says. We've got a kind of curated list of about 5,000 or 6,000, and we go out and we actually manually inspect the blogs to say, are they written by are they a spam blog or not? Basically, are they primarily about research? How many posts they do a day? This kind of thing. We select news sources as well. You might think there's a relatively low number of news sources. There's not. If you go to something like LexisNexis, it lists 80,000 or something now. Actually, a lot of them, you wouldn't really consider news. There's a lot of crazy websites out there, UFO news and this kind of thing that just reproduce press releases from anyone. It makes, again, it builds their content in Google, makes them look more legit. So we try and filter that list down. Where are the places that you're going to see value from if the story appears? It's quite a big list. Again, the barrier is quite low, but if you think about what you as a journal editor might care about, where would you want articles in your journal to appear? You might think, okay, fine, in Time Magazine or The Guardian or the BBC News, maybe even right down to kind of local, regional newspapers, this kind of thing. But what about all the other tiny little outlets that we've decided are kind of faintly spammy? What happens if we get that wrong? What happens if they're actually very important to a particular niche? Like, just by us manually curating these blogs and news sources, we're introducing this bias into the system. And maybe that's unfair. What's the balance between us protecting against gaming and also pulling in as much attention as possible? So those are some general questions and how we've kind of tentatively been approaching it. In terms of how we deal with it, the first thing I should say is we have a lot of debates internally and also with other altmetrics and traditional metrics tool providers. It's a little bit uncomfortable because I feel, or certainly in computer science and in software development, security through obscurity is what you're not meant to do, right? You're meant to say, okay, if you've got problems in the system, make it as open as possible, then other people can come in and fix it. Don't rely on the fact that nobody else, apart from the people in your company, know how the algorithm works to ensure that nobody's going to game the algorithm. And I really like that idea. Unfortunately, I think realistically for us at the moment, anyone determined to game the system is far more likely to move faster than we are, or the wider community is to fix a hole or to find a problem with it. So we generally don't talk an awful lot about how we detect gaming. And that's why in general I think you don't see a lot about it. There's some papers from 2012, from PLOS and things, but not a lot of detail. How we do it is mainly actually through, first of all, automatic pattern detection. So that's the first step, just because there's a large volume of articles coming through the system at any one time. So we can look at things like, okay, the vast majority of articles, like the long tail of articles, are not getting much attention at all. So you're already eliminating a great deal of noise, if you like, in this context, just by only looking at things that have been, where there is actually attention. A classic giveaway is a lot of attention in one source but not in others. So I'll talk about this in a bit. So it's a kind of basket of metrics approach. It's very suspicious to us if we see, 10,000 Facebook posts, but then nothing on any of the other social networks. That seems very weird. Almost always, you see a diffusing. Even if it's only members of the public tweeting about it or sharing it, we see it on Facebook, but then it's also carrying over to Twitter, to Google+. It'll appear in one or two blogs and in the news, this kind of thing. Equally, if it's any kind of scholars sharing it or talking about it, we'd expect to see things like Mendeley readerships roughly correlate with the level of attention it's getting on other sources. So it is one immediate red flag is if we see a single source getting too much attention. And then suspicious co-tweeting is about the spam networks. So we can figure out that if there's 1,000 accounts that only ever tweet the same papers, that's unusual. That's not normally what we'd expect to see. So all that can flag things up. We get an automated process, and we have to manually check it. That's the only way we can figure out what's gaming versus spam and this kind of thing. We have someone actually check the flagged articles. So I've kind of glossed over inspecting the relevant mentions manually, but I'll talk about that later. The key thing for us is that obviously there's the numbers involved, and that's what people think they're gaming. Like, I've got 10,000 tweets. But the important thing then for us is to not just have the number, but to have the raw data available for inspection so we can see what makes up that 10,000. So after all this, after we've actually detected gaming, again, this is an area where your opinions would be very welcome. How do we penalize? What do we actually do about it? Lots of people have, I think there are bigger problems in gaming altmetrics, frankly. It's not an unreasonable thing to say. The way we handle it at the moment is if we're sure that it's gaming, we report to the journal involved. So we just send our contact at that publisher an email and we say, hey, just for your information, we've noticed this. We think it's gaming and here's why, X, Y, Z. I've never heard of any kind of censure being taken further than that, people say, oh, thanks, that's interesting for us to know. I haven't heard of any kind of what happens afterwards. And then we try and clean up the page. So we remove the relevant spammy tweets. Occasionally, if it's happening on an ongoing basis, we'll freeze an article. So we'll say there's no new attention being collected for this anymore. But then there's a limit to what we can do. And the limit is mainly because of this. When we first flag something up, obviously it takes a while for it to be manually created by us, this kind of thing. At that point, the moment we're suspicious about it, should we already be flagging these metrics as suspicious, just in case someone's going in and using them? Should we be putting a warning on the page, this kind of thing? Should we be suspending new data collection for it? And the worry is, obviously, what if we're wrong? We might not think it's a big deal, but you never know what might impact on an author's reputation, who might see it, how they might interpret it if they see a warning. Even if we're careful about saying in the message, oh, the author is is potentially not to blame here. It could be, some external agency that has nothing to do with the scholarly publishing industry or science at all. You never know. The worry then would be, of course, as well, what happens if, there's obviously gaming your own papers to look better, but what happens if you deliberately badly game your competitors' papers to make them look bad? So once they're caught, obviously. So this is an open question for us. At the moment, we don't put a warning on it. So we flagged it internally, but we don't explicitly say this paper looks a bit dodgy to us. So our primary defense against gaming is really, we've got how do we detect it, but really what we're trying to do is focusing on preventing it in the first place. I mentioned gaming is very rare. One of the reasons for that is deliberate. So we push, even though we've got metrics in our name and all metrics is the field and things, a lot about all metrics is the qualitative data rather than quantitative, right? No funders ever say, we need you to show a all metric score of 20 or you're not going to get any money. Nobody ever says that. When funders are talking about using all metric data, what they really mean is case studies, about pulling specific examples from the Almetrics data and using them. You can back them up with evidence then, but they need to be in a kind of narrative form. So that makes it a lot easier, I think less likely for people to game, simply because it is fairly obvious. When you go, if you say my paper's been widely shared on social networks and somebody goes to check the evidence you provided, and it is pictures of ladies in bikinis and gold bars, then it's fairly obvious that you're telling porkies. The second thing is, and I think the most important one, is really providing a framework for interpreting this mentions data. So that's related to that, how funders are already asking for case studies and things. When we're talking about how you should use Almetrics data, we're hopefully always getting the message across that the number is the signal that there's something interesting there, right? So if we have metrics, it's about there's something that's worth looking deeper into. It's the way of telling the difference between, out of a set of 1,000 papers, the 25 that have been mentioned a lot, and the long tail where there's relatively little attention. And again, remember, it's not anything to do with quality. Those could be very high quality papers, but if you're specifically interested in quality, in attention or impact, this is the kind of filter we're asking you to look at. But the filter isn't a metric, it's really an indicator. What you're supposed to do then is click through, see the underlying details, see the underlying data, and hopefully from that you can figure out whether or not it's legitimate promotion or not. So we're going to end there on that note. Like I say, I'm interested in any thoughts or questions either here or afterwards. But the point I would end on is that good practice in Almetrics, I think, is as important as good data. So we found that it's not just about the data collection, it's about providing this framework for understanding it and encouraging people to use it in the right way. It's mainly because it's so difficult to police otherwise. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Good.